It was a quiet, warm Wednesday in central Georgia, the kind of afternoon that made you forget just how cold a city could be. Captain Nadine Walker wasn't dressed for comfort. She stepped out of her unmarked police cruiser in full uniform, pressed, precise, and uncompromising. She'd just returned from a meeting with the city council on police oversight, her voice still echoing in their chambers. Every step she took across the asphalt radiated calm command. Not arrogance, just someone who had earned their place. And she had. At 39, Nadine was the highest-ranking black woman in her precinct, and one of the only women of color to lead a district in the region. Most days she didn't have time to think about that. But today her father crossed her mind. He had worn the badge before her, Detective Arthur Walker, until a baseless complaint from a white rookie officer cost him his career and broke his heart. Nadine didn't say much about it, but she carried that memory like she carried her Glock. Quiet, ready, part of the uniform. She had promised herself that no one would ever write her story for her again. Not this city. Not this system. That promise stayed with her as she walked into Patel's Jewelry and Gifts, a modest corner store in a worn-out plaza she'd visited dozens of times. The owner, Mr. Parikh, a soft-spoken man in his 50s, always greeted her with the same line. "Welcome back, Captain." It was one of the only places where her title came before her race or gender. Today, he offered her that same warm nod. "Good to see you again, Captain Walker," he said, his voice clipped with respect. "Just a quick snack," she replied, offering a small smile, "a granola bar and a bottle of water. Nothing more. It should have taken 2 minutes. But from the moment she walked in, something felt off. There was a shift in the air. Something colder. She spotted him near the back, standing too still. A white officer. Broad-shouldered, early 30s, buzz-cut, blue-eyed. He wasn't browsing, he was watching her. His uniform bore the name Bailey, a name that didn't match any of her direct reports. Not from her precinct, not from this side of town. His posture was tight, arms folded like he'd already made up his mind. Nadine didn't flinch. She didn't give him the satisfaction of a reaction. She paid for her items, said thank you, headed to the door. Then came the voice behind her, low, sharp, and heavy with suspicion. "Excuse me, ma'am. I need to see some ID." She turned slowly, deliberately. "Excuse me?" she said, keeping her tone even. Bailey stepped forward, hand resting lightly on his holster, his voice coated in thin authority. "You were acting suspicious. I saw you handling merchandise. Like you were gonna steal something!" "I need to verify your identity." Nadine held his gaze, not because she was confrontational, but because she had done this before, had lived this before. The difference this time was she outranked him. "You must be confused," she said. "I'm Captain Nadine Walker, Central Division, and unless you have probable cause, I suggest you take your hand off that holster and walk away." But Officer Bailey wasn't confused. He was deliberate. His jaw clenched. "Turn around. Put your hands behind your back. You're under arrest for attempted theft." His voice was louder now, authoritative, unafraid of witnesses. A lie spoken with the ease of someone who knew the system would protect him. For a moment, she froze, not in fear, but in calculation. She had trained officers like him, filed reports on misconduct, testified in hearings, but she had never stood on the receiving end of her own badge, her own justice. And now, in the middle of a store she'd visited 100 times, her wrists were yanked behind her back and locked in steel. Her water bottle dropped. Her granola bar rolled across the tile. A child nearby gasped. Someone pulled out a phone, and Captain Nadine Walker, 39 years old, decorated officer, daughter of a discarded detective, was marched outside under the weight of a false accusation, too stunned to speak. She didn't know then that the arrest was planned. that the store owner had been visited by Bailey days earlier, that the security footage had already been tampered with. She didn't know that her photo, handcuffed on the sidewalk, would go viral before she even made it to the precinct, or that her silence, her refusal to scream, would make the clip even more haunting. All she knew was this: someone had just crossed a line. And she wasn't backing down. The holding cell was colder than it needed to be. The kind of cold that wasn't just physical, but institutional, sterile, indifferent, and silent. Captain Nadine Walker sat on a metal bench, her back straight despite the pain in her shoulders. Her hands, now free from the cuffs, still bore the deep red marks where steel had pressed against skin. She didn't lean forward, didn't bury her face in her hands. She couldn't. Not in here. There was a camera in the corner, and she refused to let it catch her broken. She wouldn't let the system, her system, document her unraveling. Minutes earlier, she'd walked into her own precinct, not as a commanding officer, but as a suspected theft. Officer Bailey had muttered to the desk sergeant as if he were reading from a script. Nadine had watched every flinch in the room, the patrol officer who avoided her eyes, the rookie who whispered, "That's Captain Walker," as if he was watching a ghost. When Bailey pushed her forward at the booking desk, the clerk, a weary older officer named Jimenez, froze mid-motion. His eyes scanned her face, then flicked to Bailey. This has to be some kind of mistake," he muttered. Bailey didn't blink. "I saw her attempt to leave Patel's without paying. We've got store video. She can deny it all she wants." Nadine's jaw tensed. "You're lying," she said, each syllable clean and cold. "There's no footage of me stealing anything. I paid in full." Bailey's smile was a brief, bitter twitch of the lips. "Tell it to Internal Affairs." The scanner beeped as her ID was processed. Her name, rank, and badge number lit up. The screen in red, Walker N., Captain. And still, not one of the men or women behind that desk stopped the procedure, because protocol was louder than conscience. They took her fingerprints. They took her belt. They took her watch. She handed them over with steady hands and burning eyes. When Officer Jimenez hesitated with the camera, she nodded once. Permission enough. The flash lit up the wall behind her. Just like that, Nadine Walker had a mugshot. Back in the cell now, time felt unhinged. 5 minutes stretched into 20. She'd been through worse: hostage negotiations, riot response, standoffs with armed suspects. But this felt different. This wasn't a job gone sideways. This was a betrayal. And it was personal. From the hallway outside, voices approached, muffled at first, then sharp enough to catch, "Captain Walker's in holding?" "You've got to be kidding me!" She's the one who ran field command on the Greenpoint standoff. She's not a thief. Bailey booked her? Did she say anything? Silence followed. Then footsteps. A key turned. The door creaked open, and Lieutenant Denise Harper entered, lips drawn into a thin line, her blonde hair pulled back tight. Harper had served with Nadine for 7 years. They'd disagreed often, argued loudly, and closed ranks even louder. She didn't speak at first, just looked. Then she exhaled. "You okay?" "No," Nadine said, "but I'm still standing." Harper stepped in, shut the door behind her, and sat on the opposite bench. "I watched the footage Bailey submitted. It cuts out halfway through. Suspiciously clean. The cashier didn't even blink when you paid. And then, boom, edit. It looks like something was removed." Nadine raised an eyebrow. "So why the hell am I still in here?" "Because once paperwork's filed, everything stalls. IA wants to avoid the appearance of bias. They're sending someone in from district oversight." Nadine leaned back against the wall, her voice low but taut. "This isn't just bias. This is a setup. Bailey didn't just accuse me. He planned this." "I know," Harper said, "and we're going to find out why." Silence settled again. This one less hostile. Harper looked down at her notepad, then back up. Did you ever file that harassment report on Bailey, the one from 2 months ago? Nadine's jaw tightened. No, I let it go. Thought it wasn't worth the paper. He mentioned it at the last disciplinary hearing. Said you were too emotional to lead a command unit. Nadine laughed once, a sound with no humor in it. Emotional. Right. The room shrank again. Harper stood. You're not staying in here overnight. I've already called the union rep, but this is going to get ugly. It's already ugly, Nadine said, and we haven't even hit the news cycle yet. Harper nodded. She hesitated by the door. For what it's worth, I believe you. As the door clicked shut behind her, Nadine sat alone again. But something had shifted, not in the room, but in her spine. They'd come for her name, her dignity, her legacy. But they had underestimated one thing. She had fought too long to be erased by one white man's lie. And the moment she walked out of this cell, they would understand exactly what kind of mistake they'd made. The air outside the holding cell smelled of antiseptic and dust, but to Nadine Walker it tasted like defiance. Lieutenant Harper had returned less than an hour later, flanked by a civil rights liaison from Internal Affairs and a city attorney. No apology, not yet. Just clipped orders, signatures, and a paper trail with the word pending next to every charge. The cell door clicked open again. Not in surrender, but in strategy. They weren't releasing her because they believed her. They were releasing her because it had become politically inconvenient not to. Harper didn't say anything this time. She just nodded at the door. Nadine walked past her, upright, collected, as if she were leaving a meeting, not a jail cell, but the walk through the precinct halls, her halls, was unlike anything she had known. Silence greeted her like a slap. Co-workers glanced up and quickly, away. Some didn't look at all. The bullpen had never felt so cold, so rehearsed in its discomfort. But she didn't stop walking. She didn't pause to explain. Power, she knew, wasn't loud. It was how long people stared after you when they were too afraid to meet your eyes. In the captain's office, her office, she locked the door behind her and opened her laptop. The world outside this glass still doubted her, but the system inside this machine could still be her weapon. Within seconds, she pulled up the incident report. Bailey had filed it within 15 minutes of the alleged theft. The details were neat, too neat. Bullet points with specific timestamps, listed witness statements from no names, and a line that made her stomach turn. Suspect appeared anxious and attempted to evade. She remembered that moment vividly. She'd smiled at Mr. Patel, told him to have a good day, and walked toward the door. She hadn't run. She hadn't twitched. She hadn't even looked back. Bailey had been waiting, watching her before she even got to the register. That was never routine. That was intent. She clicked over to department logs. Her badge swipe data showed she had clocked in and out exactly on schedule. No disciplinary flags, no missing hours. Then she pulled up Officer Bailey's records. His transfer to her precinct had only occurred 6 months ago, assigned during a departmental shakeup after another precinct was audited. His evaluations were average, but one footnote in a prior complaint caught her eye. Demonstrated difficulty accepting orders from female superiors, especially those of color. It wasn't a smoking gun, but it was the beginning of a pattern. Knock sounded. She didn't answer. The door creaked open anyway. Marcus Bryant stepped inside. He didn't smile. He just said, "You okay?" "As okay as someone who got fingerprinted by their own department can be," Nadine replied. Marcus was a longtime detective, one of the few she trusted. She slid the file across her desk. "Bailey's report. Read it." He did, twice. It's fiction, but tight fiction. Like someone coached him. Nadine nodded. "I think he tampered with the security footage, cut the middle." "You think Patel helped him?" I think Patel got scared, or worse, was pressured. I saw it in his face. Marcus leaned forward. Let's go talk to him. They left through the side exit to avoid the front lobby. No sirens, no flashbulbs, just two people walking toward truth, one step at a time. The drive to the store was quiet. Nadine didn't play music. Her fingers tapped against the wheel, silent Morse code for rage. When they arrived, the bell above the door rang like a false note. Mr. Patel looked up from behind the counter and froze. Captain Walker, he stammered, eyes darting behind her. I thought that I'd be in a cell, she interrupted. I'm not, and you and I need to talk. Patel's hands trembled. I didn't mean to cause trouble. You didn't. But you're in it now, Marcus said coolly. You saw what happened, and we need the original footage. I already gave it to that officer, Patel whispered. Nadine stepped closer, her voice a blade wrapped in velvet. That officer edited it. I need your backup, the full file, uncut. Patel's eyes searched hers. Whatever he saw made him nod. He led them to the back office, opened a drawer, and pulled out an external drive. It's all here. I didn't delete anything. He told me it was routine. Said it was about shrinkage numbers. I didn't know. Now you do, Nadine said, taking the drive. Back in the car, Marcus didn't speak until they were out of view. You think that's enough? It's a start, she said, and I want it reviewed before Bailey figures out we have it. They didn't go back to the precinct. They went to the civil oversight office downtown, neutral ground where chain of command meant less than the chain of evidence. When the footage played, silence fell over the room. Nadine watched herself walk in, smile at Patel, buy her granola. Bar, pay in cash, leave with a receipt in hand, no hesitation, no theft. Then came the part Bailey submitted to the department. Cut. Fade. Missing 43 seconds. Someone had trimmed truth and replaced it with narrative. The officer reviewing the tape, an older black man named Director Ames, leaned back in his chair. You just cracked this wide open, he said, and it's not just going to end with him. Nadine sat still. She didn't exhale. Not yet. The balance of power had shifted, but barely. She was out of the cell. She had the footage. She had a witness, but she didn't have justice. Not yet, and now the real fight would begin. The grainy footage had barely finished playing when Director Ames stood up from his chair. He said nothing at first. He just looked at Nadine with something between disappointment and recognition. Not disappointment in her, but in the world they both knew too well. You understand this doesn't stop with Bailey, he said finally, walking slowly to the office blinds and pulling them shut. He didn't doctor that footage by himself. He's not smart enough. And he doesn't have the access. Nadine nodded. Her arms were folded across her chest, her jaw tight. I know. Marcus, standing at her side, asked the question no, one wanted to say aloud. Then who helped him? Ames didn't answer immediately. He leaned against the windowsill and sighed. You remember Lieutenant Ron Lasker? Nadine's stomach sank. Internal Affairs, she said flatly. Bailey's former CO before he transferred to our precinct. Ames nodded. He's been circling promotions for years. Keeps his nose. Clean on paper, but we've had whispers. Preferential treatment, informal intimidation tactics. Never enough to stick, but always enough to smell rotten. The next 72 hours moved like thunder. Quiet above, but seismic beneath the surface. Deputy. Commissioner Booker didn't call a press conference. She didn't send out memos. She acted the way black women in power often have to act. Strategic, silent, thorough. With the override logs and falsified footage in hand, she moved through internal levers few others could reach, assembling a temporary task force inside the Department of Standards and Integrity. Nadine Walker, still officially a captain, was reassigned quietly. Consultant to the review board became the new label taped to her door. To the outside, it looked like she was being disciplined. In truth, she was being armed. Inside a secure meeting room in the basement of police headquarters, Nadine sat with a three-person audit team, reviewing old misconduct reports tied to both Officer Bailey and Lieutenant Lasker. One by one, files were pulled from dusty drawers and outdated databases, civilian complaints ignored, body cam footage mysteriously erased, incident reports with missing timestamps. Patterns emerged like mold on paper. Lasker hadn't just protected Bailey, he had buried a dozen like him. We need to subpoena internal comms, Nadine told the team. If Lasker coached the store clerk, there might be traces, texts, call logs, even deleted emails. Everything lives somewhere. The lead auditor, a stoic man named Rowe, nodded. We'll move on it. By Friday, they had them. Internal call records showed Lasker had contacted the Patel store landline 3 times the week before Nadine's arrest. The longest call lasted nearly 10 minutes, enough to stage a setup, but it wasn't until Monday that they got the break they didn't even know they needed. Rowe entered the meeting room holding a small envelope. Anonymous tip, he said, handing it to Nadine. Inside was a printed still frame from a surveillance camera across the street from the convenience store. The Patel location. The image, grainy but clear enough, showed Lasker standing beside Officer Bailey, both in uniform, outside. The store the morning of the false theft report. The timestamp was the same morning Nadine had been arrested. He had been there the whole time, in plain sight. The image alone wasn't a smoking gun, but it was a matchbook waiting for fire. We bring him in, Nadine said. Let him see how it feels. But Booker's reply was more measured. Not yet. We need him complacent. Make him believe he still holds the board. So Nadine returned to duty. Publicly. She was reassigned back to her precinct, walking into a room where no one knew whether to salute or stay silent. Some looked away. Some nodded awkwardly. Others, those who had always suspected Bailey's temperament, offered quiet glances of support. But the air was different now. Not pity, not fear, just uncertainty. As if the room was bracing for something larger than one arrest or one mistake. That afternoon, Bailey was placed on administrative leave pending review. He didn't say a word as he packed his locker. Nadine didn't need him to, because the system had already begun to answer. She began holding short briefings for her team, not just on protocols, but on principles, reviewing body cam standards, discussing escalation practices, asking, not telling, officers what they feared most on the job and what they wished their badge still meant. It wasn't warm. It wasn't friendly, but it was real. I'm not here to talk down to you, she told them. I'm here to ask why this department has more complaints from our own community than from outsiders, and why we're okay with that. Some shifted uncomfortably, but no one walked out. Meanwhile, Booker's task force moved behind the scenes. Investigators quietly interviewed the store clerk, who, under pressure and fearing obstruction charges, admitted he was coerced by Bailey. Phone records, store camera footage, and digital fingerprints all pointed back to Lasker's office computer. It was enough. By the end of the week, Booker handed Nadine a sealed envelope. Warrant for Lasker's suspension and seizure of his devices, she said. Internal Affairs will escort him out today. Nadine didn't cheer. She asked to be there. At 9:03 a.m., she watched from the second floor as 2 IA officers approached Lasker in the bullpen. The room fell silent. He stood, stiff-backed, and smirked up at her. This your little crusade, Captain? Nadine descended the stairs slowly. Calm, measured. No, this is your reckoning. He was escorted out without incident. But the moment wasn't for him. It was for everyone else in the room. For the rookie officer who wondered if being good was enough. For the detective who once looked away when Bailey snapped a civilian's phone in half. For the sergeant who always said, "Don't rock the boat." They had seen the system spit on its own and still stand, and now they were watching it correct itself. Later that evening, Nadine sat with Marcus on the precinct rooftop. "You think anything changes?" he asked. She took a long sip of coffee. "Not everything, but something. What happens to Bailey?" "Terminated. No pension. And Lasker? Pending indictment. Tampering with evidence. Abuse of authority. Federal civil rights probe incoming." Marcus whistled. "That's a lot of bricks." "They laid them," she said. "We just kicked the wall." Down below, the street buzzed with the Friday night crowd. Families, lights, motion. Nadine watched them all and thought about the kind of badge she used to dream about wearing. It wasn't gold. It was invisible. Respect. Dignity. Truth. She didn't know if the system could ever be clean, but she knew it had to be made to answer. And now, for once, it had. The hearing was not televised. No press, no cameras, just a sterile municipal chamber, 3 ethics board members, a handful of observers, and 2 names on the docket: Officer James Bailey and Lieutenant Aaron Lasker. But in the stillness of that small room, justice didn't whisper. It thundered. Nadine Walker sat in the 3rd row, dressed in plain clothes, no badge, no insignia. The last few weeks had peeled those layers back, revealing something more permanent underneath. She wasn't here as a cop today. She was here as a witness, and a woman who had refused to be erased. Lasker sat across from her at the defense table, no longer smirking. His eyes held the dull recognition of a man whose illusion of control had shattered. He didn't speak much during the proceedings. His attorney did the heavy lifting, blaming process gaps, administrative missteps, lack of evidence. But the footage spoke louder. So did the store clerk's statement, and the digital traces from Lasker's login history. The panel asked few questions. They didn't need to. This was not about deciding if he did it. This was about whether they had the will to say it mattered. When it came time for closing statements, Nadine stood, not out of protocol, but out of principle. "I was arrested on suspicion of theft for purchasing a granola bar and a bottle of water," she began. "Not because I acted suspiciously, not because I broke the law, but because I am a black woman in uniform. And to some, that makes me a threat before I speak." The room was still. Officer Bailey saw my skin. Lieutenant Lasker saw my silence as consent. But what they didn't see, what they never see, is how much power we hold when we stand in truth. You don't get to rewrite my record. You don't get to vanish my work. You don't get to silence people just because they know the system better than you ever bothered to. She paused, looking straight at the panel. "If this institution still stands for anything at all, let it be that you will not protect men like them over women like me." She sat down. A full breath later, the lead panelist cleared her throat and read the board's decision. Bailey, terminated with prejudice. Lasker, referred for criminal prosecution. The chamber didn't erupt. There were no cheers, no applause, just a quiet gasp from someone in the back row. Maybe a rookie, maybe a relative, but for Nadine it was enough, because justice, when real, doesn't need volume. Later that evening, she stood alone in her apartment, the city blinking through the window. Her badge lay on the table beside her phone, unceremonious, familiar. She had almost quit 3 times since her arrest, almost walked away. But the point of surviving wasn't to leave quietly, it was to stay and make noise for those who couldn't. A knock at the door interrupted her thoughts. It was Marcus, holding 2 folders and a bottle of wine. "One for celebration, one for the next battle," he said. She opened the folders. Internal Affairs had authorized a department-wide review of arrest procedures and racial bias protocols. Nadine would co-lead the initiative. "You helped start this," Marcus said. "You didn't just clear your name. You changed the landscape." Nadine smiled, faint but real. I didn't want to be a symbol, she said. I wanted to do my job. Turns out I had to be both. She raised the wine glass, then set it back down. There were still policies to rewrite, officers to train, cultures to unlearn. But now, there was proof that a system, however corrupted, could be bent back toward accountability. Not overnight, not without resistance, but enough to mean something, enough to say, we saw what you tried to do to her, and we chose to see her instead.